Morning, everybody. Hey, it's warmer today than it's going to be on Wednesday. So just be thankful for that. Let's thank Love and the Outcome one more time. They did just a great job. You guys so responsive this morning. It's awesome. You showed them there really is life at Pathway, because last night, Saturday night, was Saturday night, not very much alive, and 9 o'clock seemed a little cold and tired, and you guys showed them there's actually life at Pathway, so that's a good thing for us. And the venue, welcome music. Can we just welcome the venue right now upstairs and also online? So really good. So we're in this series called Satisfied, and it was supposed to wrap up today. We're going to extend it a couple more weeks, and let me just tell you what we're going to do, is that next week, Dr. Tim Elmore is going to be with us. Tim was with us about 3 months ago. He's going to come back, and he's going to talk about what it means to kind of cultivate that sense of satisfaction in the life of your kids through their identity. And I think it's just going to be a remarkable weekend for us to have Tim back with us for the weekend. Then the next weekend is going to be really a cool wrap-up for us as well. But we've been looking at this little church in Ephesus, right on the border of modern-day Turkey, a church that was established by the Apostle Paul. He spent about 2 years there establishing this church, and then he turned it over to a young guy by the name of Timothy. And so Paul left Ephesus, and then he wrote a letter back to the church in Ephesus called Ephesians, and it would have been read to that little church. We know that what Ephesians, or what Ephesus was like, was it was a town of kind of like Fort Wayne, about 250,000 people. It was a lot of prosperity. We know that you could buy anything and everything you wanted there. That church that would have existed would have been impacted by the sensuality of the community. You had this temple built to this goddess Artemis, who is the goddess of fertility. That brought all sorts of stuff into play. And also there was a deep spiritual kind of heaviness upon the city because of that type of worship. And we know that because of what Paul writes in Ephesians 6 about the siege of warfare. And then we also know that it was a city that certainly it was built around slavery, about 60,000 slaves in a town of about 250,000 people. And so that existed too. But there was a lot of issues that went on in Ephesus. And so Paul actually wrote a little letter to Timothy, and it was really instructions on how to guide this church, how to lead the church, how to organize the church. And then towards the end, he talked about the heart of the church. And one thing he talked about this issue of not allowing your love to be caught up in things of this world, but making sure that your love stays focused on Christ and on things that really are important to him. What's interesting is that when you go into the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 2, there's a little bit of a letter written to the church in Ephesians in Revelation 2, where Jesus says to the church in Ephesus, you've done all these wonderful and great things, but one thing you've done is that you've lost your first love. And I thought about that. I thought, what was the first love? Well, the first love was Christ, the focus of putting Christ in all things. If you go to Ephesus today, there's no church in Ephesus. It's gone. And so what is it that gets us off track? Well, I really do believe that the thing that gets us off track is what Paul tells young Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, when he gives some instructions to him about this issue as it relates to the issue of wealth. And we talked a little bit about it last week. I want to dig a little bit deeper into it this morning. And the reason I want to do that is because I think it's important for us to get our arms around this thing, get our heart around this as well. Nietzsche made the statement back many years ago. He said, with the absence of God growing in Western culture, money will replace God. And when you think about our culture, the truth is that we think a good day is when the market's doing this. We think a bad day is when the economy's kind of doing this. And it's easy for us to get all of our attention upon this issue of what we have and what we possess, and we lose sight of where Christ needs to be in the midst of our lives and to be center of our lives. And yet many times it can be our wealth and our riches that gets us off track here a little bit. And so there's a problem that we face. And if you have your outlines, you want to pull it out this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about the problem. And the problem that Paul addresses in 1 Timothy 6 is he addresses a problem which is simply this thing called the love of money is what it is. And really the question here that we all have to wrestle with is, how do I know I'm more in love with money than I am in love with God? So this is what he says in 1 Timothy chapter 6, 6 through 10. And little words to young Timothy. He says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. We've read this before. But we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. Just think about that for just a moment. But if we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. If you underline your Bibles, underline that little phrase, content. Those who want to get rich fall into all temptation and a trap, into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. He says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. He doesn't say money's evil. He said the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith, and they pierce themselves with many griefs. Now, what does this all mean for us? What does this mean for you and for me? Well, let me just kind of give you a couple things that it relates to all of us. First is this, and that is when you think about the love of money, it is connected to things that are significantly bigger than money. It's connected to things that are significantly bigger than money. The love of money is not an overspending problem. The love of money is a contentment problem, is what it is. And we talked about this the second week of the series on this issue of contentment. How in Philippians 4, Paul says, listen, I've learned to be content in all circumstances. I know what it is to be in plenty, and I know what it is to be in want. And yet he learned to be content because of realizing that Jesus is the one who's going to provide for my every need along the way. As one writer put it so well, contentment is not achieved through getting everything we want, but by training the heart to experience full joy and deep peace even when we don't have what we want. And so it's easy for us to think, I want that, and therefore I need that. I said to you last week about buying a house, and the fact is that I was out kind of looking for a house and thinking maybe it'd be time for a change. Laura passed away, almost 3 years ago, and we've talked about just maybe some changes along the way, and thought, well, maybe moving into a new home, a newer home would be a good thing. A different home is really what it was, and so began to look. And every time I'd walk into the house, I think, but I love my house. And when we bought the house, we didn't buy the most expensive house we could buy. Matter of fact, interesting, I went ahead and got pre-approved for a loan. I don't know if you've ever done that or not, but in looking for a house, you get pre-approved. So I got pre-approved for a loan. They told me how much they would loan me. I thought to myself, there is no way that I would ever have that because I'm content. I want to be content with what I have in the midst of this moment. And so just made the decision not to do that. So every time I'm looking, I'm thinking, well, but I'm content with what I have. And there's a thing that's involved here, and that is that many times this love of money, it's attached to something bigger than money. It's attached really to something deep inside of us. Because we think that those things on the outside are going to take care of something that's deep on the inside. And really what that is this, and it's the first thing we talked about the first week of the series, and that is it's all tied to an identity problem. It's all tied to an identity problem. It's all tied to this issue of kind of what do I need and what's important for me. And as long as I have what I need and I have what I want, I'm going to feel good about myself. And really, it's all tied up within the context of your identity. Paul says these words. He says, listen, one thing you need to understand is this, that you brought nothing into the world and that you'll take nothing out. And what Paul is saying is this. He says, don't let the things or don't let those its of this world begin to control your heart and begin to take control over your life. And the fact is, he says, listen, when you came into this world, you came into this world naked. And when you leave this world, you're going to leave this world with nothing. I mean, you're not taking anything out of this world as well. And so really what he says is keep all things in perspective. Make sure you keep all things in perspective. Matter of fact, it's kind of like this. When we look at our lives, we know that we all had a birth date. And we all know we have a death date. We just don't know when it's going to be. And somewhere in the midst of this, we have this thing called life. And it's very interesting because in this life piece, we can lose sight of things that God says are really important to us and are vital to us as well. We get our attention off of things and it all becomes about us. And because it becomes about us and it's all external, we end up doing things and getting ourselves caught up in things that end up impacting our life. It impacts our relationships. It can impact our marriages. It impacts just our sense of anxiety and our sense of how we walk through this life. And yet we find ourselves, instead of living a life of contentment, we find ourselves realizing, wait a minute here. As long as I've got this thing called money, I can use it to get what I want, and that'll bring fulfillment. But in the end, we realize we're not all that fulfilled. And some of us, let me just say this to you. It's interesting when you talk to people that are facing death. We're all facing death, but we don't really think about it much, do you? But I think sometimes there's a little bit of a gift in there when people realize that I'm facing death. Because when you're facing death on a daily basis, you look at this entirely different, don't you? I walked into a hospital room this past week. I have a friend that is facing this very issue in his life. And so I made a drive and I walked into his hospital room. He didn't know I was coming, and I walked in and he's dealing with this issue. He's facing this reality. And when I walked in, his first words to me were, "Contentment, huh?" And I thought, you've been watching online, haven't you? He said, you bet I have. And so for the next hour and a half, we talked about life, and we talked about death, and we talked about stuff, and we talked about things, and it was very interesting how, and this is a guy that has been pretty successful in his life, how all those things that seem to matter back here, just, they took on a totally different perspective right now. And he's just thinking about things different. And so I thought about that. I thought about all of us. I thought about my life in the midst of all that. I thought, how do you keep life simple so that you don't lose sight of your identity and how Christ wants to see you, and you don't find your focus on your identity on things outside of Christ? And here's just 3 things I thought about, and I just thought about them this week. One is just keep it simple. I mean, make decisions that are simple. Don't complicate your life. Don't find yourself living upside down. Just keep things simple. It doesn't have to be that hard. I think sometimes people make life a little harder than what it needs to be. And just keep it simple. Make good choices. You have the ability to make good choices. You have the ability to make bad choices. And when you think certainly about this issue of wealth and finances, begin to make good choices. Think about the choices you're making. Is this a good choice or is this a bad choice? How is this going to affect me? In other words, have a plan. And then live with eternity in mind, realizing that listen, this life is going to end one day, but yet I know that if I live my life right, I can live in such a way that actually what God has given to me, I can use to advance his kingdom as well on this earth, or to show a level of generosity in the life of someone else, and in many ways showing Jesus along that way as well. And all these things kind of keep all things in perspective. Interesting, Solomon, the book Ecclesiastes, he makes this statement. He had built all these things. He built these wonderful cities and all that went with it. And then he's towards the end of his life, and he's thinking about it. And he writes these words in Ecclesiastes 2:10-11. He says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, he says. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. He says, man, I thought all this would bring fulfillment. I thought all this would bring me joy. I thought all this would bring me some level of peace. But in the end, I was left as empty can be in the midst of it. It was meaningless. It was a chasing after the wind. What did I do in the midst of all this? But ultimately what it is it becomes a pride problem, because it becomes all about me is what it is. Listen to what Paul says to young Timothy in verses 9 of chapter 6. He said, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. In other words, it becomes all about what I want. It becomes all about what I think I need. And in the end, what ends up happening is those desires actually begin to plunge me into ruin and destruction. It's why marriages fail over finances. It's why relationships break up over finances. It's why when the will is read and a brother and sister are sitting in the room together and that will is read and somebody feels like she got more, he got more than what I got, and suddenly there is this break off of relationship. It's why you find yourself kind of upside down, deep in debt, because it's all about what you want. And really, it becomes all about very much a pride issue. And so what's the solution for all of us in light of this? Let me just give you some things to think about as we kind of wrap this part of the series up. Here it is. The solution is this, and that is that instead of finding your focus in all of those things, find your focus in the love of Christ. Find your focus in the love of God. This is what he says to young Timothy, again, in verses 11 through 12. He talks about this issue of being careful that you don't fall into all these desires and you plunge yourself into ruin and destruction. And then he says this, but you, man of God, he says, flee all this, flee, and pursue righteousness and godliness and faith and love and endurance and gentleness. In other words, again, godliness with contentment is great gain. Get your focus on the right things, young Timothy. Pursue these things. Flee from all that. Pursue this. He says, fight the good fight of faith. He says, take hold of eternal life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. Flee, he says. Pursue, he says. Fight, he says. Those are strong words. Strong words. Strong action that we need to take within our lives. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, just 3 things. Here's the first one is this, and that is that begin to say no to you. Begin to say no to you. Begin to say no to you so that you can say yes to the things that God places upon your heart that you want to say yes to. Look at what he says in verse 17 of chapter 6. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to become arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, he says. Again, he's not saying it's bad. He's not saying it's anything wrong with having the resources that God has given to you. But what he says, don't put your hope in those things. He says, it's so uncertain. You don't know when it's going to tip upside down or not. He says, don't do that. But put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. That every perfect gift comes from the Father of heavenly lights. In other words, just make certain that you don't get your focus off who is the provider of all things. So the more you have, the truth is this, the more you have, the harder it is to say no to you. Because you're thinking, well, I've got this, now I can go do this. I got that bonus, now we can go spend that bonus on all of us. I've got this raise, I'm going to spend even more upon me. And that is, in other words, what he's saying is don't get caught up in making it all about you, is what he's saying. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant. Put all their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. But put their hope in God, who richly provides everything for our enjoyment. Now, how do you do that? How do you put your hope in God? I shared this with you last week. I'm going to share it with you again this week. And for those of you that do it this way, I know you're sitting in your seats because you'll tell me after the service, as others have, man, that was good. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for doing that. It's like when I'm listening to a preacher preach and I'm listening to someone teach, and my kids hate this when I do this. I'll be sitting there and they'll say something good and I'll go, What I didn't realize until a couple months ago is everybody else hears me, around me. And, Dad, can you not do that? Can you not do that? So now I'm doing it a little louder just to embarrass them a little bit more, No, but here's the deal. Some of you are going to go, So you can handle your finances one of two ways. One is spending, saving, and then giving. And that is that we're going to spend what we can, and we might be able to save a little bit. We don't really have a plan. We'll save whatever is there, and then we'll give whatever little we have to give. And that's what we'll do. Or you can look through Scripture, and we don't have time for it, and it would be like a 10-week series, and you'd be going like, don't give us 10 weeks on this thing, Ron. But we could spend an awful lot of time just walking through all the verses and all the principles that God places in His Word on the issue of how to handle your resources. As we said last week, how to manage it, how to manage what's been entrusted to you. We could look all the way through Scripture. And the thing that you would see is you would see this from the Old Testament all the way through the New Testament. You would see that really this is upside down living. And that right side up living is that you begin to look at your money, first of all, your resources, as what has been given to you by God. And you realize we've been entrusted with this. And so therefore, right from the very beginning, we're going to give. We're going to give. And then we're going to realize that actually there are principles within Scripture that talk about saving right off the top as well. And we're going to begin to save because there might be a season when things get tough. There might be a season when things get rough. And so in that midst of that season, as Philippians says, that God will provide for all of our needs, that in many ways God is providing as you are saving. And then comes that element of living. So for me, this is the way in which I've done my life. When Laura and I got married, I was 33, she was 30, and walked in our marriage, and this was a non-negotiable for both of us. She was working, and I was working, and I don't know where it got instilled. This got instilled with me when I was a kid, and watching my dad and watching my parents. My parents could have lived in a bigger house if they wanted to. But they said, no, we're committed to what we believe God has called us to do. And my dad saved. And then we lived on the rest. And there were times when Dad said no. There were times when I had to say no. I remember when I was 12, one thing my dad taught me about this issue of saving and living is when I was 12, I wanted a new bicycle because I got a hand-me-down. I was the last kid. I was the baby. And babies, they suffer tremendously regarding the rest of the family. And so, any babies in the family? Any babies here? Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. Yeah, babies. They always say, "Oh, babies got the best." No, we got the worst. We got the hand-me-down. I got the bike that everybody else had. And so I had this old red bike. We learned how to ride on this bike. I want a new bike. And I went to my dad. I said, Dad, I want a new bike. I need a new bike. He said, go find a job. 12. So I did. I found a job working at a little local florist right down the street. Could walk to it. And I made my money, and I bought that bike. And then I wanted some bigger things. Hey, Dad, go find a job. And so I took on delivering newspapers. And for several years, I delivered newspapers. And then I got older, and I wanted bigger things. Go find a job. You know? And my dad just taught me the value of saving. And then it was later that I realized this value of giving. And as a guy just getting married, and Laura, we came into it, we said, no, we're going to give. And we were all about percentage giving. That's where we were at. And we were all about 10%. And as we grew, we gave even more. But let me tell you, we gave, and then we had a percentage that we put down that we were going to save. We committed to saving. And then that affected our living. Do you know what that did for us? And I said it to you a moment ago. It affected the price value of the home that we bought. Because when we bought that house, we said to ourselves, do we want to be stuck to this thing forever? But we know we can do this, but let's do this instead. Let's go with what we believe we can afford. And so all this what this did for us is it challenged us. It challenged us in how we lived our life and how we've lived our life and now how I live my life. And some of us in this room, I know that this may be hard, but some of us in this room, I think we're kind of living upside down. And you're thinking, oh, Ron, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to get out of this. Can I just tell you, we have a class around here called Financial Peace University. Doesn't matter where you're at. And we'll come alongside of you. But if you will get into FPU, you're going to learn and you're going to begin to establish some principles on how you can begin to move from being upside down to being right side up. And beginning to live in such a way that maybe there's a little more freedom, beginning to think about making good decisions, good choices along the way as it relates to this issue of finances. Now, let me go to the next one. Almost done. Sorry, I beat you up on that one a little bit. And that is, then what ends up happening is when you live that way, you begin to cultivate an awareness of things that really matter. He says, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. And in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age so that they may take hold of life that is truly life. He's saying, listen, don't make it all about your life, but look towards even greater things that are going to outlive you as well. This past May, Compassion International, some of you may sponsor kids with Compassion, $38 a month. And I've known about Compassion for years. And they got a hold of me and they said, hey, we're taking like 20 pastors away, all expense paid trip to Peru. I'm thinking, I'll go to Peru. Love to go to Peru. Never been there before. So we went to Peru. And one of the things they did is they took us to Machu Picchu, which is kind of a cool, incredible place to be at. It was just a gift is what it was. And part of it is they said, we know you guys work hard and we want to make sure that you have a little bit of an experience here. And so they took us up and we saw Machu Picchu, a really remarkable thing. But the thing that really kind of shook my heart, my life, is they took us into a little village. And Compassion, what they do is they go after the poorest of the poor. So these kids, these come from families that make them like $4 a day is what it is. And they really believe if we go after the poorest of the poor, we actually can turn their lives around. We can actually invest in them and give them, supplement their education and come into their homes and help their homes out, provide for some of their needs. And not only is that child going to benefit from that sponsorship, but their whole family is as well. And so we showed up in this little town, a lot of poverty in this town, and we walked into this church. And there was a couple hundred kids in that church that all lived walking distance from that church. And that was a Compassion church is what it was. Church very much like us. The building was pristine, beautiful, and very clean. And all of the workers that worked for Compassion came out of that church. And they were invested in these kids. And they were invested in these families. And we began to go on some little walks as some of these homes began to get visited. And so we went by some of their homes. We went into some of their homes. This is about the size of the home that most of them lived in. This actually is in really great shape. And we would walk into these homes and walk around, and most of them are dirt floors, and some of them no kitchens. It was a little hot plate, maybe a fire off to the back. We were in one house, and I'm walking around this house because it didn't take long to walk around it. And as we're walking around it, kind of seeing it, I'm where's the bathroom? Where's the shower? And so I asked our translator, I said, where's the bathroom? Where's the shower? And so he asked him, she said, it's at the church. And the church was the center point for that entire community. When this community flooded, the waters came up to about here. They would grab their mattresses out. They had a couple mattresses, and these families would grab their mattresses and try to find higher ground. But many of them went to the church. The church became the place. It became the shelter point for them. And we began to look at this, and I began to just think about one of the last things we did is we went to another site, and we went to a place, this little community where there's no church. And in that community, they were building this church. And a church from California had pooled money and off their excess had decided, you know what, we're going to come alongside of Compassion. We're going to challenge our church body to sponsor a bunch of Compassion kids, and we're going to pick an area to do it. And what we're going to do is we're going to provide the resources, the funds to build a Compassion-type church in that community. And we're going to build the church. And so they were working with the denomination. We came in, we saw this thing, and they had already, this church is being built, and they had already identified who the pastor was going to be. And so it was this young pastor and his wife and their young kids, and we gathered around them at one point. We prayed over them, and I'll tell you, it was so humbling for me to be in a place like that. And I thought about that church in California that was giving of their resources to make a difference in another part of the world, to establish a church of hope in that community for those kids who are going to be sponsored, you know, on a monthly basis by people who may never meet them. And when you think about that, sometimes you think, will my little make a difference? Your little makes a huge difference when you invest it for kingdom's sake in the life of someone else. For us as a church, we've been so blessed as a church. Aren't we? And we are so blessed as a church. We are so blessed as a church. As a matter of fact, you know, last year, I'm just going to kind of throw this out at you. And this may be a number that some of you may think, well, I'm just going to, you know, what am I giving anything to this church for? But, you know, last year, you exceeded in your giving by over $700,000 in your giving towards our budget. And we didn't spend that, you know, per se. We don't look at that and say, well, here's what we get to do. We actually, a good portion of that is going to go towards the build over here, because we finished out the build on this. That was about a $6.8 million project. And you gave and you gave and you gave. And we were about 2.7 short. And so we went into this deal of 2 years. We want to pay that thing off within 2 years. And so a good portion of that's going to go. But then our elders said, but wait a minute here. We want to make sure that as a church, we've been blessed. How are we going to bless those ministries outside this church? And so we have a budget in which we give to missions, and we have local organizations we give to as well. But we said, as we do every year, at the end of every year, if we have surplus, we want to be a generous church. And we want to give outside the walls of this church. And so our elders got together, we prayed, we talked about it, and so a portion of those dollars went to various ministries in our city. Restoration House is a house on the south side of town. That this is a home where women who are coming out of prison and beginning to kind of reorient themselves back to society, they go to this home. It's run by Tommy Carden, and this is a home where these women receive Celebrate Recovery, they receive mentoring, they receive discipleship, and many of them come to terms with an understanding of the depth of God's love and grace that is given to them through Jesus Christ as their Savior. It's an amazing place. Youth for Christ, big organization in town, they have a ministry called City Life, which happens down on the south side of town, Southside High School, and that ministry is impacting the lives of young men and women in that sector of our community, and their lives are being changed because of the power of Jesus Christ. We said we want to continue to help you advance that within that community and continue to open up new opportunities for new clubs to go on within that city. Bridge of Grace, Javier Mondrogan, that's a hard name to say, and I met with Javier yesterday. They run a church called Bridge of Grace, again, very close to the City Life area, and actually City Life runs a ministry out of their church. But what they've done is they've gone into this community and they've begun to buy homes around their church, and they refurbish those homes, and new people have moved into those homes, and they're taking over a community for Christ. And I sat with him last year, and I said, Javier, what are some of your biggest needs? He said, you know, Ron, he said, we tend to run short. We tend to make ourselves towards budget, but our budget for our church is separate than the ministries we do outside the church. He said, but we're retaking this community, and we got families coming and kids coming. He says, man, we could really use a part-time children's pastor to come alongside and begin to provide discipleship and direction for our kids. And so we said, we can help you do that. And so we've come alongside of them to make that a part of Bridge of Grace. The Rescue Mission now has a ministry. that is there for men who have come out of prison. When they show up at the rescue mission, they show up in their orange suits and their shackles. And they walk in and they wonder, how am I going to reorient myself back into society? Many of them have been in prison a very long time. I met a young guy who went in when he was 15 the other day. He just got out, he's in his 20s now, and we stood and we talked, and I'll tell you what, I listened to what God is doing in his life in the mission. He said, this is changing my life. This is giving me hope. He said, I have a job now. He said, this is giving me a new beginning. I stood with a 72-year-old man. He said, I'm retired, I don't need a job, but they're helping me get my life right. He said, I'm excited about this program, what it's doing in my life. I can't thank you enough. And so we've said, let's continue to make that program happen within our city because it's making a difference. The rescue mission is making a difference. Posterity Heights is a ministry that is run. It's in our south side of our town again, and they're building a housing addition that's going to really turn the lives of single moms around and beginning to give them good, strong mentoring that is all based upon an understanding of who Christ is. And Cedric Walker runs that, and so we've said, let's come alongside of you to get the word out even more on Posterity Heights within our city. And then Mozambique, we're in Mozambique. We have a ministry in Mozambique. And there's a ministry in Mozambique that comes alongside and disciples all these individuals that are coming to know Christ, their Savior. Their funds have dried up because of issues going on in the economy in Africa. And we said, we can come alongside with that as well. So because of your faithful giving, and I know sometimes you might think, well, does my giving really make a difference? Everything makes a difference. Because of your faithful giving, we're able to give outside of the walls of this church within our city and our community. Isn't that an awesome thing? It's an awesome thing, is what it is. It really is. And let me tell you what that does. What that does for us as church is this, and it will do the same thing for you when you really get a handle on your finances, is it keeps Christ in the center of all things. It just does. It puts Christ here, and it puts me here. And on a bi-weekly basis, and every so often, even outside of that, every time I get to be generous, Christ, thank you for all that you've given to me. Thank you for doing it. And so for us as a church, it matters as well. And we're going to keep Christ at the very center of all things because God's going to continue to do a great work right here on Carroll Road as well as within our city as we partner with those ministries within our city. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the future for this church, excited about what God is going to do in this church and through this church. And he's done so much already. Now let me just kind of close with this. I'm just going to take about 5 minutes here at the end. Front of your seats, there's a little brochure that looks like this. And every year at this time, we just simply say, there's some right down here, actually. There's some of the baskets on the front row if you want to grab those over there on the side. There's some right over there, down below on that side, right there. And so every year, we just try to give you a glimpse of what's going on here at Pathway. And so here it is. If you look at Connect, we have Connect, Grow, Serve, Go. And I'm going to do this very quickly. Last year, for us as a church, we saw about 3,158 people on a weekly basis here at Pathway. When I think about the number of years ago when we started with like 4 families, it's remarkable what God has done. When you really look at how many attend Pathway, if you look at Easter last year, about 5,800 people were here, or 5,600. If you look Christmas Eve, we had 6,800 here. So somewhere in the middle of that, because some of you don't show up every week, you come once in a while. And then we've got this whole pocket of what we call CEOs, Christmas and Easter onlys. That come here on those 2 days, and we consider them a part because they call Pathway actually their home, and so it's exciting things. We built this addition. We built it with the venue. We started out at 11 a.m. and then 9 o'clock became so full that we launched into the 9 a.m. as well. And we're already talking about what do we need to be doing next to continue to reach even more within our community. Online audience, about 710 people watch online on a regular basis. Can you believe that? 710 people. Some of you are in Florida right now. And you're in Florida or you're in Phoenix or you're in a very warm place, and we're happy for you, actually, is what we are. But we're glad they're there. 675 kids in Kids City. A couple weeks ago, we had over 800 kids in Kids City on one given weekend. High school ministry and junior high ministry, 375 kids, remarkable. College ministry doing tremendous things within college, 150 students and young adults that we're reaching on a regular basis there. When you look into small groups on growing, we want you all to be connected in a small group. We brought Dana on this past year, and he's providing great direction to our small group ministry. And 700 of you are involved in a small group on a regular basis. Within women's ministry, 400 of you ladies are connected into women's ministry, and there's room for a whole lot more to grow. 375 men, obviously through Mandate Monday, a whole lot more room to grow. You look at divorce care and Celebrate Recovery, where people's lives are being radically changed on a weekly basis. It's just awesome thing of going through their hurts, their hang-ups, their habits. We look at Grief Share and Infertility and Loss. In our marriage ministry, Merge Ministry is for couples who are moving towards marriage. And over the past few years, as we launched that ministry, over 88 couples have come through this church and said, we want to make sure that Christ is the center of our marriage before we get married. And then Reengage is really our discipleship ministry to married couples. We have 50 couples in there right now. We've taken over 280 couples through that over the past 3 years, and that's an awesome thing as to what's going on. You see the serve areas, so many areas in which you can serve. Use your gifts, use your talents, use your time, use your treasure, and certainly your treasure around here. You might think, well, my little doesn't make a difference. Your little makes a lot. And matter of fact, if you want to know about what's going on in our church financially, and you want to know where we're heading for next year, if you want to see a budget for next year, you can stop by back there, and there's a little room called room number 1 back in the atrium area. And there's some folks back there. Our elders are back there and some from our finance team. They'd love to talk with you about that and give you a little better glimpse as to what's going on within the context of the finances of Pathway. You see the food pantry, benevolence, giving tree. I mean, you just give and give and give. And then on the go, we had over 119 people baptized last year here at Pathway, which is every time we do a baptism service, I'm thinking, man, God, it's worth it. It's been worth it. It's been worth it to see people who really surrender their lives over to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. So God's doing good things here at Pathway, isn't he? We're thankful for that this morning. I think we can be. Yeah, it's good. So let me just, and you can take this with you as well. Let me just end with one story that I think will maybe drive this whole thing home. When we talk about our mission to lead people into full life found in Jesus Christ, we talk about reaching people here, which is right here. That's why we're doing all we're doing to reach even more within our community. This is a growing community. We want to continue to reach more. We talk about near, which is in our city. We talk about far, which is in places that we may never go, but we have missionaries we support and we encourage, and they're an extension of Pathway into those places, France and Cyprus and Africa, Mozambique, those places that we support as well. But our city is a really important piece, because we really believe that even though we're Northwest, we got a growing demand, a growing need of something that's going on within our city. And so I'm part of an organization called Fort Wayne United. And it's an awesome organization. Irick Headley heads it up for us. And so there's business leaders and judicial leaders, and then there's a group of clergy leaders. And that clergy leader team is made up of whites and blacks, and there's a Hispanic involved in that thing as well. And we're just all together, coming together, saying, what can we do to make a difference in the heart of our city? And so this past year, many of you walked, you did the prayer walk around Oxford. About 300 and some of you showed up for that prayer walk. And it was remarkable when you showed up for that thing. It was monumental in our city. And we commissioned about 20 men who they call OGs. These men are all former gang members. And they've come to know Christ. And they live in that community, and they're concerned for that community. And it's one of the higher crime-ridden areas of our community. And there's all sorts of things go on there. And on 5 nights a week, these OGs, they walk that community in orange vests, and they're walking it, showing a presence, praying with people, encouraging people, jumping into the middle of situations that you wouldn't believe go on in that community, and changing things. And so the other night we decided as a group of pastors, we're gonna come around these OGs again and just pray for them and encourage them. And so we all showed up, about 18 of us showed up on Thursday night. And when we got there, we met at Weiser Park, and Pastor King, who heads up the OGs, he said, we're not gonna stay here, we're gonna head somewhere else. So we all went over to Vincent House. And we got to Vincent House. I'd never been a part of Vincent. I didn't know anything about Vincent House. And they own a bunch of houses along the street, and it's where they're putting families, and they're mentoring families and encouraging families and guiding families, providing for families. And the other night, Wednesday night, the OGs had finished their walk, and they kind of moved around a corner, and then there were gunshots that went off. They came back, and there was a home along that block where a mom and her 5 or 6 kids were living in this house. And there was a drive-by shooting at that house. Her car was parked out front that she uses work on a daily basis, and couldn't use that anymore. And bullets came into that house. One went right into the mattress that she would have been laying on. And thank God no one was hit. I mean, no one was hit. Well, she was terrified. I don't want to go back to that house. And so, they encouraged her to go back. And so she went back that night. On Thursday night, she went back. And so they said, we're going to go over and we're going to pray in that house. And so we all walked over to that house, and we put this mom, we walked in, little kids looked up at us and said, "What are you doing here?" So we're here to pray. Pray, yes, pray, And we gathered around, and one of our pastors just prayed a prayer, and we all were in agreement of just this warfare prayer and praying for her security and praying for her stability and praying against her fear and praying against anything evil within that house or outside that house and praying that God would just put his angels around her and around that home. And when we got done praying that prayer, she looked up and tears were just flowing. Powerful moment. I got in my car, and I'm driving out with another pastor friend of mine, and I'm thinking to myself, God, I am so blessed. My kids are so blessed. And we tried to put our head around it. We're still, but being in there, it just kind of messes with you, is what it does. And I thought about the churches in that community, and I thought about these pastors that work in that community, and just the opportunity to continue to extend hope in that community. And you know what? I don't live in that community. And most of us, we're out of touch with that community. But as a church, we're going to continue to be a church that reaches those near, reaches those here, but we are going to continue to be a church that reaches those near. And we're going to continue to put our arms around this city to saturate this city with the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it is the life that everyone is longing for. Are you with me on that this morning? Hope so. Let's stand together. Let's stand. Get you out of here. Lord, thank you for just this place and for the fact, Lord, that at times in your word you challenge us with everything that we have. And it's good. Not always comfortable, but it's good. And Lord, I just pray that you would just continue to help us to catch a vision for our community, to catch a vision for our neighborhoods, to catch a vision for our city and for our world. And that, God, you would just continue to do a mighty work in this place to expand your work beyond this place. And it's in the very precious and powerful name of Jesus I pray. Amen. See you later, everybody.